Hello, BookTube. You are once again not going to get a barrage of videos from me today, but it's Tuesday and I wanted to do a tag, especially since there's a wonderful one that is now out and about that you might want to think about doing. It originates from a video that Michael K Vaughan did. I've got the rad pad here. Michael K Vaughan did one of his videos, his conceptual, thought-provoking videos about the rules for reading. And it was really, really good. And MJ at Reading This Life has weaponized it into a tag. And I'll leave a link to her video and to Michael's video, but she did something with this tag that I don't think I've ever seen before. She's made it an open source tag, which means that when you're done with her original prompts, you are free to add some code of your own. And her original prompts are all about your rules for reading. So the prompt number one is, do you strive to read every day? If yes, do you do anything different or special to make the time within your day? And if no, why not? I, of course, do. I can't imagine. I can't imagine not doing it. Reading is not only my main joy, aside from the bean, but also my employment. It's my main passion. It's the main part of my life. So I don't strive to read every day. I do read every day. I love it. Absolutely love it. I love it as much as I did the first day that I fell in love with it. Just this endless adventure that I love so much. I hate it. It disappoints me a lot of the time, but I love the experience of it completely. So yeah, I make time. I make time every day. Lots of it. I also make time every night after midnight. At the stroke of midnight, I turn into a pumpkin. I turn off all the ways for the outside world to notify me or to get my attention at all. I don't turn off the cell phone, turn off the computer. Of course, I don't have any notifications on either one or on my iPad. You shouldn't turn off your notifications. Your machine should not be talking to you. You have enough people nagging you for attention. You should turn off your notifications. Nothing's that important. And it is habit forming. It will absolutely shatter your powers of concentration like glass on the floor. So don't do it. just don't do it. Don't fall for any of the usual rationalizations that people give about how they need to be reachable. You don't need to be reachable. But anyway, whether you do it or not, I do. I turn off everything and just read for hours every night. And that's in addition to all the reading that I do during the day. So I do a lot. I just set aside a lot of time. Prompt number two is, do you always stay within your favorite genres, or do you experiment with reading different genres and subgenres? Well, and my answer is twofold. One is that I tend to stay within my genres, but I have a large number of genres, 15 or 16 or 17 genres, that I read in regularly. And I have a long history reading in them regularly. So it's a lot of years, it's a lot of familiarity with them. So it's not just, I know I watch some booktube channels where the booktuber reads modern contemporary literary fiction and basically nothing else. They read science fiction and basically nothing else. They read epic, grimdark fantasy and basically nothing else. And I find those channels absolutely fascinating. Don't get me wrong. I love watching them, and I often get really good recommendations from them. And even if it's a book that I already know, and my opinion is sort of settled on it, so that their recommendation is not going to change my mind, it's still fascinating to listen to. But I wouldn't want to be them. I wouldn't want to. I mean, I realize that part of it is a function of necessity. I read very fast, and I read, like I mentioned, for a large chunk of every day. I basically don't do anything else. So not everybody has that kind of luxury. Either one of those luxuries. And a lot of people react to those limitations of having a job or classes or a family or a significant other or kids or all that sort of stuff, or all of the above. A lot of people react to those limitations by limiting the field where they plow. So that there's something mentally comforting, I think, in if you're faced with those limitations and saying, well, I'll read here and here, but I won't even think about reading elsewhere because I just don't have the time. So I won't even think about the new 1,000-page history of the Holy Roman Empire because it's not in my fields. I'll stick to my fields. That way I'll feel like I'm getting more done. I understand that completely, but I'm not like that at all. But so that's, on the one hand, I read in my genres, but I have a large number of genres. I don't think anyone would call it limited reading. But on the other hand, I read plenty of books that aren't even in those extended lists of genres that I read, because I do a lot of reviewing. I do a book review every day, at least one every day. And a lot of that stuff is assigned. So I don't know what's coming. I have very intentionally said to all the parties, to all the venues involved, I very intentionally said, don't limit. Send me anything, anything at all, which a lot of them have followed through on. So I get the weirdest selection of books in my inbox, that including stuff that I would never ever seek out on my own. So that helps a lot. I can't say that many of those books have been well enough done to tempt me to add genres to my already extended list, but nevertheless, I wouldn't pass that up. So it's a little bit of both. Then prompt number 3 is, do you DNF, which is booktube for do not finish, and is, in my mind, separate from putting a bookmark in a book and just saying, well, now's not the time, I'll get to it later, at some other time when I feel different. In my conception of DNFing has always been that you have decided you will not read this book. Not now, not ever. That you just don't get along with it for one reason or another. That DNFing is more of a severing than a temporary parting. If yes, what was the last book you DNF'd and the reasons why? If your answer is no, then what drives you to finish the book? And my answer is no, I don't DNF. I have once in a blue moon. Honestly, I thought about this when I was thinking about this tag. I could not remember the last time that I simply stopped reading a book and said, no, enough of that, and never went back to it, even when the book is filling me with hatred, just filling me with outrage and hatred. Even then, I read to the end. The quality that is most likely to make me DNF is boredom, rather than outrage or distaste. But even then, I've read many a book where the opening salvos were boring and the thing turned around. I'm haunted by that. And I consider it unjustifiable. Considering how much time I spend reading and how fast I read, I consider it sort of unjustifiable to DNF a book. So I finish everything that I start. Number 4 is, do you like to read challenging books? If yes, what draws you to them? If not, why do you avoid them? And here I guess I would have to know more specifically what is meant by challenging. It seems to me that can mean a couple of things. One would be that the subject matter challenges you, with the aforementioned 1,000-page history of the Holy Roman Empire. Depending on the author's willingness to explain things, that could be a very challenging book. I've read many books like that. Big monographs on artists or art movements, works of intellectual history, works of just genuine history, but on a subject, on a period that I don't know that well. Those can be challenging, but I love them. I love them all the more for that. The other kind of challenging is when the author intentionally makes their book incomprehensible, or tries to, and thinks that that is a flourish of genius. That has been going on for 150 years, and I'm not a fan at all of it. I've scarcely ever known a book that was begun and executed under those auspices to be good, even good, much less great. Sometimes it's a natural part of the author. Sometimes the author is just one of these deep swimming fishes, and there's no way to avoid that their work will end up that way. Sometimes an editor will come along, see that a work is like that, and intentionally preserve that element of the work because they view it as important. And sometimes that editor-writer combination is correct. Sometimes they're right. Thomas Wolfe, for instance, Look Homeward Angel, is, I guess, what would probably be meant here as a challenging book. But I wouldn't want any of it different. I'm willing to take on the challenge in a case like that. But House of Leaves? Please. Please. Difficulty, challenging for challenging's sake, it tends to be a no for me, a big-time no for me. I'm not the stoner at the end of the college dorm floor. I'm not getting off on how weird and poor a book is. Do you have a story to tell me or don't you? If you do, then can you justify every flourish that you take, or can't you? If the flourishes are just there to make Bill and Ted go, then they're probably not going to do it for me. And those were MJ's original prompts. But this is an open source tag. which means anybody who does it can add prompts of their own. And CriminOlly did a version of this. I think he's the first one to do this. I'll leave a link to his video as well. And he answers all of these questions. I'd like you all, I mean, I know that I'm preaching to the converted here, but still, it's music to my ears to hear. I'd love you all to go and listen to how he talks about what kinds of books he reads. He loves to read popular fiction, as you know if you participated in Garb August. He's not worried if that popular fiction verges into the trashy. He knows perfectly well what he's reading. He does not, in other words, abandon his critical faculties. He knows perfectly well what he's reading. It's just that's what he likes. And it's wonderful to hear. In his answer to this tag, his version of this tag has him reiterating that. He said it many times on his channel. It's what made me subscribe. I imagine it's what made a lot of people subscribe. It's wonderful to hear. Just wonderful to hear. It is someone simply telling you, oh, I like this kind of book. I just do. I'm not claiming that it's War and Peace, but I like it. And that is just wonderful. That is how all of us should be reading. But when he was done with his version of this tag, he added a prompt of his own. So the Olly tag is, do you read books by authors whose views you disagree with? And I do. I know of some people who don't. I know a couple of people in my own profession, book reviewing, who don't. But I do. Yeah, I want to know what's out there. I want to know what people are saying. And even if someone has views that I completely disagree with, there might be something in the book that they write that is worth reading. I've had this happen to me a number of times where I know that the person is ideologically a book burner, a racist, a race baiter. It doesn't matter. If I know that about them, and I know that they have no qualms about importing their beliefs into their works, there still might be something in there that might be worth it. Even when the odds are drastically against it, Dinesh D'Souza, for instance, who used to have some intellectual credibility, wrote a book version of his documentary about how the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. It's 100% false. And it's not just false, these are conscious lies. Dinesh D'Souza, unlike a lot of people in Trump world, in the Trump cult, is not an idiot. He knows that these are lies. And he wrote a book, did a documentary just fomenting lies, telling one lie after another, and I knew for sure that the book version of that was also going to be full of lies. I read it anyway. I'm not going to go so far as to read the kids' book that he's doing, with Donald Trump as a king. The point when you look at something like that, with a book like that, if it's, someone brain damaged, there are plenty of televangelists in America right now who think that Donald Trump is not human, that he's a god. And they'll go on at a moment's notice at great length about this sort of thing. They can be safely discarded. Dinesh D'Souza is not an idiot. So when he says this, stuff like this, stuff that is factually wrong, demonstrably false, you have to ask yourself why. I have to ask myself why. And that why will be animating why I would read a book by someone when I know that everything in the book is wrong and is going to anger me. I'll do it anyway because I'm asking why. I think in Dinesh D'Souza's case, it's pretty obvious why. He's hoping for favor in a future reign. He's hoping for favor when America changes. And when it is no longer the fancy of a children's book only to refer to Donald Trump as a king. He's hoping for something. That's why he's telling the lies that he is. That's not much of an animation. If he did write a book on the state of America, it was hard to get through. But something like that, or Peter Navarro, a Trump henchman, a Trump minion who has a new book. How he does, I have no idea. He confessed to plotting the overthrow of the United States government on national TV. He should be in jail. Totally incommunicado. His book should have been pulped. Any self-respecting publisher would have pulped it. Instead, he has a book, and if it's there, and it's new, and it's going to have a readership of any kind, I have to read it. I think that I have to read it. I feel compelled to read it. So that remit that I've set for myself, where I want to read the notable new releases across the board in the American book market, that is necessarily going to mean that I read books by authors whose views I disagree with. That's necessarily going to happen. And I have read a number of those, and I will continue to read them. So yes, my answer to Olly's question is yes. But I have questions of my own to add to this. And keep in mind, if you haven't done this tag, MJ tagged a lot of great people. I'm not going to tag anybody. I'm just going to It's an open source tag. I'm going to make an open source tagging process. If you want to do this and you haven't done it yet, so you're going to add questions to your own, keep in mind that my questions and Olly's questions you have to add to your own. They are now part of the code. In her original video, MJ says, well, maybe we'll have to break this into 2 or 3 if it gets too long. I say we keep it going and see just how enormous we can make this monster where you don't break it apart at all, where it becomes an open source coding nightmare. But my questions are, number one, do you clear your mind of preconceptions and biases before you start a new book? Or do you go in with axes to grind? Or is it some combination of the two? Connected to the point that I made about Olly's question. When I try my best to clear my mind to at least answer, so that I can answer throughout the book, is this well done? Is there anything about this that is well done? The foremost recent example of that was Jared Kushner's book. This is a deeply evil individual, was not a special counselor to the president, a very high rank in government that he was not given. He could not get a security clearance. He had to act just without one. It had to be muscled over because he's a gigantic security risk. He is totally in the pay and in the pocket and at the bidding of half a dozen hostile foreign powers, and has taken, in the course of his time in the Trump White House, took enormous amounts of money from them in more or less broad daylight. And he had a book ghostwritten for him, and it got a legendary, and now legendary, New York Times review, just ripping it to shreds. And in a case like that, I know exactly what I'm getting. I know what I'm going into, and I know already, the mention was axes to grind. I go in with axes to grind, definitely. I hate this guy. I hate what he and his cabal did and are doing to this country and are going to do in the future. I hate it nonstop, just to the bottom of who I am. The American experiment in representative democracy meant a lot to me. It was unprecedented in world history to be done on this scale and with this kind of vigor. And it meant a lot to me. It was, in its own totally imperfect, grubby, faltering way, beautiful. So books written by people who not only had a hand in ending that experiment, but enthusiastically knew what they were doing and did it anyway. Yeah, I go into books like that with axes to grind, but I still go into even books like that, wondering, is there anything here? I'm not looking at it the way the speed readers who are connected to cable news shows do. They get an advanced copy of one of these things plopped on the desk, and they're just told, by Lawrence O'Donnell's handlers or whatever, rifle through this thing. You've got an hour to give us the best parts. What are the things in here that are indictable? What are the things in here that are new, that we don't know, that maybe point to deeper crimes? This sort of thing. I don't go through it looking for that. Instead, I go through looking for not so much historical tells or betrayals of the country, but rather, is there anything in here that is interesting from a presidential memoir perspective? I've read an enormous number of presidential memoirs. In a case like that, that's why I would go into a book like that. So definitely axes to grind, but still as much of an open mind as I can. And then the second Steve question. You have to do the Olly question, but you have to do the 2 Steve questions as well. You have to add that to your code and then add questions of your own. The second Steve question is, do you recommend books? And if you end up really liking them, if so, what form do your recommendations take? And my answer to this is an overwhelming yes. I am a book recommender. That is a huge part of what I do and what I have done for my entire life since I discovered reading. That has pretty much always been what I do. Especially in the last 30 or 40 years, once it became really clear to me that my reading speed, a bit of my reading retention, and also my reading breadth, the amount of time that I can devote to reading, was opening up a gap between me and other voracious readers that I know. Decades ago, I realized that there was a gap opening up, that even those voracious readers weren't covering as many books as I was, which put me in a perfect position to let them know where to direct their energies, where to direct they had more limited time to read. All of you have more limited time to read. I view that as a very helpful thing, to let you know I'm not just rubber stamping, recommending everything. I'm not a cheerleader for books at all. I have my own set of standards, and you will know what they are in very little time dealing with me. And if you think that those sets of standards make it so that you can't trust my opinions, then you'll know to go elsewhere for your recommendations. But throughout my life, whether it's in print newspapers or in online literary journals or in bookstores or now on BookTube or all of those things, throughout my life, a great number of people, I would say the majority of people that encounter me on a regular basis as a reader, have come to the conclusion, basically, okay, I know he has dispositions and likes and dislikes, but I can still take recommendations from this guy. I can take quite a bit of recommendations from this guy. And that reaction by people is strengthened by my track record. Because I don't just recommend a book and tell you must like it. I recommend a book and tell you test my recommendations. Absolutely. Go out and test them. If I recommend something out of the blue, you've never heard anything about it, never read anything like it before, and I tell you you're still going to like it, you go out and like it, well, that's a win in my column. If I recommend something else along those same lines, you go out and try it, you like that, that's win number 2 in my column. And I rely on that. I have relied on that for decades. So I am very much, almost you could say, a professional book recommender. I'm also occasionally a book condemner. I have no qualms about doing that, but I like to think, and I have been told over the decades, that lends extra credence to my recommendations. That I don't just like everything. And that when a book is terrible, I'm perfectly happy to say so and say exactly why. So my answer to my second question is yes, I recommend books a lot. I try to gauge where I do it. If I meet somebody on a regular basis when Frida and I are out walking around, maybe they read a book a year, 2 books a year, maybe less than that. Keep in mind, nobody reads, just us. We're the only ones who read. Nobody else does. But if I know that they're vaguely interested in books, I might make a recommendation, something very general, something very gentle, something very accessible. And I try not to harp on and on about it. And then I try to gauge that the more bookish the person is, the more sincerely interested they might be in a recommendation, the more thought and effort I will put into it. Until we reach the pinnacle, which is the written reviews that I do for various venues and also BookTube, where I'm firing book talk at you all the time. I'd like to think that the emails that I have received from a great number of people over the years saying that my recommendations do in fact land, I'd like to think that those people are representative of the majority of people who take recommendations from me on this channel. So my answer to my second question is yes, I recommend all the time. And now the ball is in your court. Keep in mind, whether MJ has tagged you or not. If MJ tagged you on her original version of this tag, but you hadn't got around to making it before me and Olly made our tags, you now have to incorporate our questions into your software. You have to add our coding to yours because this is open source. And then you have to add questions. And my only question after this is, does everyone who does this tag have to keep doing it as new questions are added? Because this can become an absolute nightmare, which would be a lot of fun. So that is the personal rules for reading tag, an open source tag where you add your own coding. And that's it for me. It'll be this, and I had one book haul that I may or may not upload. It's a bit of a mess. But otherwise, the barrage of videos is going to have to wait. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.